What's good, YouTube? I wanted to start off this series. I wanted to start it off with two of what I feel are two of the most important aspects of mixing. So I'm going to get into the second one in episode 3, so be sure to check back for that. But in episode 2, this is a technique in how you go about getting your mixes to be, like they are by a professional mixer. So you listen to an album, you listen to a new song, and there are different elements or different aspects of that song that you like. Maybe it's the kick drum, maybe it's the snare, there's a lot of crack in the snare, a lot of top end, maybe the bass is really cutting through, maybe the vocal is leading the track and it's pushed up high in the mix. There's always something about a particular mix that resonates with you and says, do you know what? That sounds awesome. An example is on Games in an album, I find that at least on the disc 2, it just sounds incredibly warm. It has a very vintage West Coast sound, and I just find the tracks incredibly warm. Now, if I wanted to try and get a mix similar to that, I'm going to have those type of characteristics in the back of my head. However, if you want this to translate a little better, it would make sense to have the mix playing, no? Listen to the mix a number of times to get yourself familiar with it. But what would make even more sense is if you use it as a reference track and actually have that playing along inside your DAW, and then alternating between the mix that you like and the mix that you're working on to see how close it is. You get a feel for the levels of the instruments, you get a feel for the warmth, as I kind of alluded to earlier, and just having a pro mix in your session whilst you're mixing is the best way of potentially getting a professional mix, because you can hear what a professional mix is and then you can compare it with what you have. Now, there are a number of techniques you can use to do this. I'm going to show you a couple. Now, with every series, each of the tips are not going to be specific to a certain DAW, which is kind of why you're looking at a picture of Singapore right now. Just because, if I loaded up FL Studio and you kind of saw it straight away and you're just like, you know what? I'm not interested in watching a video about FL Studio. Yes, FL Studio is my main DAW, but I also use Pro Tools, I used to use Bitwig, and I've used Ableton and so on in the past. I just prefer FL because it suits my workflow. Anyway, for this video, I'm going to show you within FL Studio, but it's using techniques that aren't DAW specific and also using plugins that aren't DAW specific as well. Cool, so onto the mix. Now, you can do this manually. Of course, you can do this manually. You can drag the tracks into the playlist, and then you can level match by ear or use meters. I prefer to match by ear because it just makes sense. If one song sounds louder than the other, just lower the mix down. If you want it to be a bit more specific to maybe the RMS value, the relative volume, or the relative loudness, then you can use meters if you like. But I prefer to just level match by ear. Now, if you don't want to use plugins, then as I mentioned, you can definitely just drag it onto the playlist and do it like that. But myself, I like to reference a number of different songs, and the plugin I use for this is Sample Magic AB. I believe when I bought it, it was around £40, so maybe about $65. It's super cheap, and it allows you to load 9 different tracks that you can easily flick between. As you can see from my screen, I've got 2 instances of Magic AB loaded. One instance has professional mixes, and I'll just show that now. Now, for the purposes of YouTube, I can't play back the songs, but you can see what I have in here. I have a variety of different hip-hop songs. I've got Kendrick Lamar, A$AP Rocky, Dom Kennedy, DJ Khaled, Joe Cole, A$AP Mob, Lil Wayne, an old Ice Cube track, and this one's empty. So currently A would always be your track, and then B is the track of the reference, and you can just flick through and choose which one you want to be the reference, and you have loop points in here as well. So I set up the loudest bits of the song as my loop points, so I know that when I'm mixing my song, I always choose to mix at the loudest point, because if you want it to be the loudest it's going to be, then it makes sense to do it when all the instruments are playing at the same time, and you can kind of work backwards from there. So Sample AB is a good way of using reference tracks. It's a really cool plugin, and as I mentioned before about level matching by ear, you've got these different sliders here. so you can level match. You've even got internal meters, so you've got your RMS meter and your peak meter. And like I said, you can obviously load 9 songs. You've got different presets you can save and load and whatever. I mean, this isn't a sample A/B tutorial, but it's what I use for my reference tracks. Another tip I quickly wanted to cover before ending the video is isolating different frequency ranges. What I mean by that is, if you want to just hear how your bass is doing, the bass is usually something that I personally struggle with, and it's usually one of the elements of a mix that's the hardest to tame. So I might want to listen to, you know, a bass heavy song like Black Main, as I've got in sample A/B, and just solo the bass, and then compare it to the bass of my track to see, you know, how high or low it is. Obviously, I know Black Main is a heavy bass beat. If my track has more bass, then it's probably too bassy, and then I can lower the bass in my mixer, or vice versa. If it's too low, I can increase it accordingly. Again, there are a few ways you can do this. You can use a stock EQ. For the purposes of this, I've just loaded FabFilter Pro Cube. It doesn't really make a difference. You just need an EQ. You can set up multiple different EQ templates. So this one is obviously filtering out all the lows. You can, you know, create different frequency points. So you might have one EQ that goes up to 2000, one that goes down here. You know, you might change that to a high pass instead. You know, whichever it may be. You can set up different EQs for that, but that takes time and is a bit cumbersome, which is why I use Bluecat's MB7. Now, at the top of the screen, and again, this isn't a plugin how-to video, but I just want to quickly show you how I use this for references. Now, you can create these bands. You've got 4 bands here, and you can just manually drag them using this. So I might say, okay, everything above, you know, 5.4 is 1, you know, maybe 900, so on. Then if I play my track, play my track back, I can just solo the bass. So just play that. Obviously, if I didn't have the copyright restrictions, I'd be then flicking back and forth between January 28th, which is what I've got highlighted as my reference track, and then I can get a feel for the levels and kind of how powerful it is and make some adjustments from there. Alternatively, you know, I might go, actually, I really like the highs on Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. I can then flick to solo band there, take that off, and then play back the track again. And now you can just hear the highs of my song, and then you're flicking back and forth. Okay, cool. I'm getting conscious this video is getting a little long now, so just to quickly summarize, from my perspective, using reference tracks is incredibly important. It's a good way of comparing your current mix with a professional mix. It gives you a live kind of idea of how balanced your mix is, how much bass is there, how much treble is there, how high or low the instruments are, but also using a trick to solo the different bands kind of gives you a bit more flexibility, a bit more fine tuning, and you know, it's the slow road to a better mix. So I hope these 2 techniques will come of use to you guys. Be sure to check back for the next video in this series where I'll be covering mixing in mono. Peace.